Today, we're going to be talking about something that can help us feel better as we step back into living our lives. We're going to be talking about grief yoga with my guest, Kat Guthrie, today. Welcome, Kat.
Hi, Sherry. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. So tell me, first of all, what is grief yoga? I've heard of yoga, but I've never heard of grief yoga, a specialty called grief yoga.
Right. Well, it's very it's actually very emotive. It could also be called yoga for emotional release because we let go of a lot of feelings as we do these exercises. It was specifically um, originated by Paul Denniston and David Kessler, who I'm sure you've heard of David Kessler. And Paul has just put together this program that is just so beautiful, where it's four parts. We start with awareness of where we hold our emotions, and then we move into expression. Then we move into connection with each other, with our own, with our loved one, with our higher power, whatever it is when we want to connect to. And then it's surrender. So it's a really a beautiful program.
So how did you discover grief yoga?
Well, my son died 22 months ago, and the only thing that made any sense to me after he died was yoga. I mean, somebody telling me what to do. Put your arms over your head, bring your hands down, breathe in, breathe out. Because I don't know about others, but I could stop breathing. And so it was yoga brought me back into my body, into my breath, because I think it's really important that we get it back into our bodies, definitely. And then, I eventually just looked online for grief yoga. I don't know how I did, but I did. Or maybe it was through David Kessler, I guess. I was listening to one of his podcasts or something like that and learned about grief yoga. And then I had to go. I went from New York to California to learn it. And it was so beautiful. It was such a release. And every time I offer it, every time I take it, it's a beautiful release.
So were you a yoga practitioner before?
Yeah, you have to be a yoga teacher in order to teach grief yoga. You have to have that first 200 hours. So it's an adjunct to that. And I had actually stopped teaching yoga for a while. I taught it for like 14, 15 years, and I just decided I took a break. But then now all I'm teaching is grief yoga in the yoga department.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, is this something that you have to do in person, or is it something that virtually you can do?
It works beautifully online. It's amazing. I didn't think it would, because it was so personal when we were in the classes, but it works really beautifully online. Because one thing is, because if you're working through grief, sometimes you want to be anonymous as you do it, so you can turn your camera off during that time. But then there are other times where we might ask you to turn the camera back on so that we can connect with each other and share or witness each other's grief. So it works beautifully. I'm surprised, but delighted that it does.
So, how does this differ from other yoga practices?
Well, I had taken a grief yoga series here in New York, and I was disappointed because it was mostly restorative, or, let's light a candle for your loved one, or, and then lie back and put your legs up the wall or whatever. And for me, it's the somatic experience. It's the release that's really important. That was what was so important for me as I went on my grief journey, was working it out in so many different ways. I went to breath work sessions. I went to places where you can really work it out of your body, because otherwise it gets stuck. We get stuck, we get closed down, we get contracted. So the idea is to just work it out.
Or you wanted so when you were in the throes of grief after following the death of your son, there just came to be a time where you knew that you had to get that release to feel better. So were you doing it to feel better, or were you doing it to feel less pain, or was it a little bit of both?
Oh, that's a good question, Sherry. I would say it was a little bit of both. I mean, I trained as a Phoenix Rising yoga therapist, and I knew I had been trained to know that we can hold stuff in our bodies. And so I just knew that I could tell that there was stuff being stored in my body. So it was really my intention to work it out of my body, but also it just feels really good to release. Sometimes, we don't have a good role model for grief in this culture. We don't allow ourselves to cry. I mean, in other countries they have the wailing wall, or they have people, who you hire people to make noises for you. And well, we don't have that in this. Mostly it's just like, do it yourself, get over it, and move on. And that's really tough. And we don't have to be that way. We can be supported in it. We can be held. We can be led. So that was my idea.
So how has it helped you?
Well, I think I just am so much lighter now. Of course, it's been 22 months, so I think that happens after 22 months, but it doesn't happen for everybody. And I can see that, I go to other grief classes or programs, and I see that's how people get stuck. I
Mhm.
just I feel like I unstuck myself. I feel like I made grief a job for at least a year. I went to workshops, and I made it my job because I knew. Well, I'll just tell you a little bit more about my story. When I was
I'd
growing
love to
up,
hear your story and your son, about your son.
when I was growing up, I lost two sisters to a progressive nervous system disease, and so I watched them die slowly. And at the end of that, I felt like I I shut my heart down. I closed my heart down. I knew it. I could feel it. I wasn't really aware of it consciously, but as I got older, I knew that that's what had happened. So I worked for years to open my heart back up. And then when my son died, I just said to myself, I'm not going to let this close my heart. I'm going to keep my broken heart open, and it's going to be painful, and it's going to be could maybe even horrific, but I'm going to keep it open so that I can feel what I need to feel, so that my heart doesn't, so I don't have to build that wall around my heart again. Does that make sense, Sherry?
It absolutely positively does. And if I may share a little bit about my story, because I lost my son, he was an infant at the time, 21 years ago. And because there were complications prior to his death, he I was put on antidepressants. So I feel that I had always felt that my grief was trapped inside of my body, right?
Yeah.
And I had no way to bring it out. So this would have been wonderful release for me, because what had happened was a year later, on Mother's Day, believe it or not, I sneezed in my sleep and my disc exploded in my back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So your body does store grief.
Yes.
It stores grief. And I would have much rather have learned a yoga modality and release in that way, that was a very healthy and spiritual way of dealing with my pain and my sadness.
Rather than having your disc explode. That
Right.
sounds very painful.
It was.
Yes.
It was. So when I heard about what you were doing, I thought it was just absolutely amazing. And what kind of results are people getting? Like, I would imagine that you're so passionate about this because you're able to help so many people get back on the road to healing again.
Well, what's been interesting is that during COVID, there's so many different kinds of grief going around now. It's like, certainly it's the loss of a loved one, but it's the loss of it can be the loss of who we feel we are, even if we've lost our identity as a person. Loss in a relationship, some of our relationships are getting really rocky during COVID. So I think what's really wonderful is, I had one woman who had an organ transplant, and she said she was grieving the loss of what her body had been, and it really helped her. And I think that's what's cool about it, is that there's so many different ways to help, and so many different griefs, and it's not one specific area or anything. I think we all hold grief, and I think as we grieve, we tend to. It's like a grief is a train, and we end up adding another car at the end of the train, and then we have to watch the whole damn train go by. And so COVID has brought up a lot of grief, and now especially with the nation going through so much turbulence and racial unrest and protests and things that bring up a lot of emotions for a lot of people. That's another thing that can be released. So yeah.
That's beautiful. And I had a guest on my podcast a few months ago, and she described grief as the loss of something we hold dear. And I think that's a really great description of it, because we're all experiencing something of it during this pandemic.
Definitely, yeah. The loss of something we hold dear, is that what?
Mm-hmm. Or
Yeah,
someone.
or someone, yeah.
Right, right. So tell me a little bit about your son so that we can get to know him.
Well, he's back there. I have a little yoga place up here where I teach grief yoga, and I do keep a picture of him back there. He was just adorable. I don't know if you can tell. He had a smile that lit up his whole face. He lit up everybody's lives who knew him. He died, unfortunately, surfing. He was an adventurer. He was 25. He loved just doing anything that took balance, skateboarding and surfing and snowboarding. And he was just full of energy and life, but also full of love. And it was truly amazing when he passed, that I just hearing his friends talk about him and his teachers and everyone, because everybody loved him. And of course I did too. And I think the thing about Keaton, his name is Keaton. I will call him Is, because I believe he is with me still. And I think about Keaton is, I know that Keaton would want me to live my best life. Keaton would be devastated if I was grieving too long, or I think there's obviously, you have to get over what you have to get over. But for me now, it's about getting back to joy, the joy, and living for him as well, the joy that he would bring to other people, and learning to love again and live again.
It's not always easy to do, but what do you think? Do you think that your yoga practice helped you get to that place? How did you get to that place? Because I know right now there are people listening in who have lost children, especially moms like you and I, and it's been years, and yet they're so tired of waking up so sad and in pain. And you can tell them, I don't think your son or your daughter would want you to be living this way, but for some reason they can't make that connection or that separation. You say your son is still with you. He's co-creating. You're going on co-adventures with him. Is that how you keep him alive? And is that integral part of you moving forward and really stepping back into your life?
I think it is. I think also we came up with a foundation that we're going to create for his legacy, called Keaton's Kids, that takes underprivileged kids on transformative outdoor adventures. I think refinding a purpose was really important for me, and teaching grief yoga is a purpose, and certainly Keaton's Kids is a big purpose for me, something to put energy and life into. I also, we haven't talked about this, Sherry, but I also teach sacred sensuality classes and have written a blog about 5 ways to get back into your sex life after you've lost someone. I know this is a pretty touchy subject, and we didn't talk about this, Sherry, so I don't know how you feel about this.
That might be for another episode of this, so that we could devote more time to it. Because I think that, especially if you've been in, a romantic relationship with someone that you've lost, that is, and it doesn't matter whether it is someone that you've lost to death or someone that you've lost to divorce.
Well, it's not only that, it's if you've lost your child too, because there's
Right.
this idea that, well, first of all, our bodies shut down, and it's how do you wake your body back up? And I think I think anything somatic that you do will help wake your body up. And I think, as Tony Robbins says, our state is our physiology is our state. So if we can open up our bodies, then we can change the state of our minds.
Oh, that's
I
wonderful.
really do believe that.
So, is there anything that we can do that you can show us or um, teach us right now that we can do to offer some kind of release when we're feeling it starting to well up? Is there some place where we could start? Is it with our breath? Is it with our movement? Is there anything real quick that you can show us that can get us on our way?
Well, I think focusing on the breath is certainly the first thing to start with, because we close our we close our lungs down when we're constricted in grief. So I think it's just a matter of letting air out, and sometimes our throats get constricted, and so letting air out, letting air out and letting the sound come out, and then letting whatever comes out after that come up, because just letting your throat ha it might bring up all kinds of stuff, and letting it come up and letting it be and going through it. I think that's the main thing, is that instead of holding it back, I can't cry, I can't do, let it out. So whether it's, we do a thing where we just punch
Mhm.
and we pound, and uh, and and we open our hearts, the sky. These are all things, and then whatever comes up, let it be. If you open your heart up, and your heart's not used to being like this, and all of a sudden you're like, and you have to cry, cry, let it go, let it let it go as long and wild as you need to. And it's okay to cry, and it's okay to wail, and it's okay to pound, and it's okay to really somatically move it out of your body. Go into a private place and do it. And really, I think whether it's grief yoga or someone who works somatically, I went to a couple of workshops where it was all somatic and breath work. They're very small, so I don't know whether they want me to publicize them right now, but I'll ask them and let you know. But they're beautiful places to let go of stuff that you just don't want to carry anymore. And that's the point, is this, let it out, let it out.
I think that is so key, because I remember truly thinking to myself in the early stages of when I was going through grief, is that I just had to keep putting it on the back burner because it just wasn't a convenient time right now. I had a 3-year-old son at home. I had a television career. So I had, so I'll get to it later. I'll get to it later. Or the fear that, oh my gosh, when I finally get to it, it's going to be so overwhelming that I'm not going to be able to handle it.
And I'm not going to be able to take care of my 3-year-old child. I can understand that. Yeah, it's so then it's a matter of setting a time aside, right?
Right, right.
Yeah, I
And
mean, because if you don't, it's gonna bite you in the ass later down the road, I think. I mean, just like me with my sisters, we were trained. We didn't cry. We didn't cry. We were Guthrie girls, and we were strong. And I watched, the funerals of both of my sisters, and we stood strong and didn't cry because we were trying to be, stoic for the community. And
yeah,
it's not healthy. And then it came back and bit me, because I was realizing I wasn't allowing myself to love as I could. I had shut my heart down, and yeah, had to open it up again. So you can do the work now, or you can do the work later.
absolutely. Absolutely. So do you have a community where people can learn more about this? I can absolutely put a link, in our show notes, but tell me about what you're trying to start and what you're doing.
Well, I have a Facebook page called Moving Through Grief, THRU, Moving Through Grief. I am, because this online stuff started so quickly, that we're just starting that.
Mhm.
But yeah, and that's my community right now for grief yoga.
Oh, that's wonderful. So I want to thank you for sharing your story, your path, your journey, and and what you're doing. Thank you for bringing healing to the world. That has to make you feel so good that something greater has come from this horrible loss.
Yeah, I think if we can ever find those gifts, as whatever they may be, it is helpful. Nothing takes away all that pain of the pain of losing a beloved, wonderful child. But if we can move forward with purpose and ease and grace, that's all we can do.
One other thing I wanted to add, just moving forward does not mean that you forget them or that you miss them or that they were important or that they had great meaning in your life. It doesn't mean that you're I had one person say, I feel like I'm betraying my grief or betraying it. They said grief, they're betraying their grief. It's not. That was his path. I like to believe that that was his path and his journey. It's a part of yours. Yours continues.
Yeah. I was doing breath work once, and you can, all kinds of things can come up while you're breathing. And while I was breathing, my sisters came to me. This was before, 2 years before Keaton died. And they died at 21 and 26, or 26 and 32 rather. I was 21 and 26 when they died. And they came to and sat at my side, and they said, this is kind of woo woo, but this is what happened. They sat by my side and they said, we lived exactly the amount of time we were supposed to live. We lived the purpose we were supposed to live. And we've moved on, and you should too. And at the time, it was a great gift to me because I hadn't moved on from the grief of my sisters. I still probably haven't, although that's dwarfed by the grief of my son. But having that message before my son died at 25 was an amazing thing, just because I thought, okay, I'm his mother. I would never have him die at 25, but if that's what happened. And so, here it is. It's like, yeah, I don't, yeah.
But your journey continues, and I love the direction that the steps that you're taking in your journey, because it's helping so many others, and so many others who are going to be feeling this pain at some point in their life. So that's very important work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Important work you're doing as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Kat, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.